I'm feeling it. You know, it's tense up here. I'm feeling tense. I can feel it.
Oh my god, my flashlight went off. Oh my god, my flashlight's blinking.
Who's down here with me? I got chills all over my body right now. Holy Whatever this negative energy is, push me! Push me down these steps!
Hello and welcome to the Ghost-Addicts Podcast, the very first talk show dedicated to everyone addicted to the paranormal. Thank you for tuning in and feeding your addiction. This is Ryan here, hanging with the three guys on this wonderful evening. How are you all this evening, gentlemen?
Not too bad. How are you fellas?
I'm doing pretty well considering. How about you guys?
I'm not doing too bad.
We had originally thought that we were going to talk about psychics and mediums tonight, but it turns out that kind of fell through. We didn't have enough information, and we didn't have enough questions on our social media platform to sustain that discussion. So instead of talking about psychics and mediums, what we're going to talk about tonight is a very important topic, something that investigators should all be aware of, because when we go into some of these locations, sometimes things can follow you home. And we wanted to share some stories of times that we've had spirits or entities or strange energies follow us home from investigations and locations. It's happened to me before, and it's happened to all of the guys here as well. So we have a lot of stories that we can tell. And I think you all are going to be able to use this to your benefit, to be able to understand better ways to protect yourself and better ways to keep this from happening, and also understanding it a little bit better as it happens, because if you're not aware of what's going on, it can be a very confusing process. I mean, am I right, gentlemen? When it first happened to you, did you understand what was going on?
Yeah, you are right, Ryan. I think it is very important to share these stories and tell everybody what's going on, and, to make people feel like they're not crazy, and, that it happens to a lot more people than you would expect, I think.
Absolutely. Now, what do you think? Should we start back in the day when it first happened to us, or should we start with our most recent bout with an attachment or something following us home?
Well, let's start with recently, since it's fresh in our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important for you all to understand that this still happens to us at times, and it happened to us very recently. Those of you who have not seen it, go over to our YouTube page and check out. We did a live stream with an artifact from Steve's museum, a haunted ventriloquist dummy, which seemed to have a very dark entity attached to this doll, and we caught some amazing evidence. I mean, absolutely phenomenal EMF and REM pod interaction. Now, Steve, tell us a little bit about this doll, and without giving too much away, because they obviously want to go watch the live stream to find out more. But tell us a little bit about the doll, and tell us a little bit about what your takeaway was from that live stream.
Well, the doll was actually brought to me by a good friend, Antonio Gum, who actually received it from a known demonologist from Scotland named Jason Love. Very little was actually included, characteristics-wise, of the doll, except that it was known to move its head back and forth, generate cold spots in the room or the dwelling it was in, and give an overall vibe to people that was near it, in the same room with it, that it was not a very nice fellow, as Jason Love did say in the description of it. Definitely makes people feel very, very uneasy, like they're being watched. So it's a very, very interesting little guy. But what I took away from that experience the other night from our mini investigation, if you will, our live feed, it did confirm my belief that the item indeed was heavily charged, if you will, with energy. I did have a strong belief that it was haunted by an intelligent entity, and just since then, the museum just the overall aura, the vibe, if you will, of the museum has definitely intensified.
Absolutely, and go over to our YouTube page, go click on our actual page itself, find that live video of that ventriloquist doll, and watch that live investigation and watch everything unfold before your eyes. And what we witnessed, absolutely blew us away. It was incredible, to say the least. But the story begins with the live stream, but it continues after the camera cuts off, because it is still continuing to this day with some of the activity that has followed us from what we believe to be that doll. Shortly after the live stream ended, we were carrying the doll back up to the museum, and I had grabbed a hold of the doll, and I was the one that was carrying it, and Jason was using the restroom, and we were waiting for him before we went upstairs to unlock the museum and put everything back. And I was standing there in the middle of the hallway with the doll. I was looking at it, and just kind of jokingly, I was stroking the doll's chest, and I said, "You did really good, buddy," which was very creepy to me, but the whole point was I was trying to creep out Steve and Dave. And as I did that, it was really strange because I almost could feel the transfer of energy. I felt a really warm sensation on my hand that kind of moved up my arm, and before I knew it, I could almost feel it in the pit of my stomach afterwards. And I almost knew immediately that, okay, that might have been a really dumb thing to do. But at that point, what was I going to do to go back and fix it? It's just one of those things you live and you learn. So we put the doll back in the museum, and we left, and we came back here to Wheeling. And Jason and Dave have had a number of experiences since. Oddly, I have not had very many, but Jason and Dave here at this house where we live have had some very, very crazy experiences. I mean, you guys can take it from here because you know way more about this than I do.
So to begin, it pretty much all started the day after the event. Isn't that correct, Ryan?
Yeah, that was the morning after is when stuff started to happen. That was when you messaged me about the first occurrence.
Okay, right. It was the morning after. I had been awake for a little while, and we have a door in our entryway that leads to a closet that goes under the steps that ends up going nowhere. It's just an under the stairs closet that if you've watched any of our live streams, you've probably seen. So that closet has a very distinct doorknob on it. It's glass and brass, I believe. So it has a very distinct sound to that doorknob when you open it. So I was lying up in bed, and just to preface, I'm fairly hard of hearing, so that should, add a little bit of credibility to the story. So I was lying in bed, and to begin with, I am hard of hearing, so it adds a little bit of credibility to the story. I was lying in bed, and I heard the doorknob to this closet start to move. I heard the doorknob twist, the door opened, and I could hear rustling around in the closet. And then I heard, a few seconds later, I actually heard the doorknob again, and the door shut. I got up, and I thought it was Ryan leaving for work. So I went over and I looked out the front window down onto the street where we all park, and his car wasn't there. And I asked him, I said, or no, you didn't have to go to work. You were going to the gym. That's what it was. And, yeah. And so I texted you, and I asked you, where you were at. And you said that you were pulling up to the gym there, and you'd been gone for about 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. And the event had happened about 2 minutes before that. So I knew at that point, obviously, that it wasn't Ryan. So I came downstairs, because initially I was going to ask him what he was looking for, or what was wrong, because the level of what was happening was fairly loud. So I came downstairs, and I was thinking, okay, well, maybe it's Jason. And Jason was actually still asleep. and I knew then that it wasn't Jason, so I patiently sat around waiting for Jason to wake up, and I asked him if he had gone into the closet at any point and done anything, and then went back to bed, and he said no, that was the first time he got up. So that, to me, was very alarming, because that took a lot of energy, a lot of force to make that happen. And it's not the first time that door and doorknob have been heard mysteriously making noise, is it?
No, that door and that doorknob has actually been a focus of a lot of different activity, which is why whenever you look at that experience, you think, you can't automatically kind of connect that to the doll, because we've had so many experiences with that door and that doorknob. It kind of makes you wonder if it was just the normal activity of this old house that we live in. It sits just a little ways back from the back bedroom, which is my bedroom, and from where your bedroom is, it's directly below you. So when that doorknob and that door is messed with, it can be very frequently heard, and not to mention that, but Jason, where he sleeps, is very close to that as well, the very next room. So when something messes with that doorknob, it is very easily heard throughout the house by a number of us, or at least one of us. So we've had many experiences in the past with that doorknob, so it wasn't automatically connected. But the stuff that happened after that, I think, is when we really started to scratch our heads and think maybe this is the spirit from the doll following us back after that live stream.
Absolutely. And I don't even think I had asked you at the point, Jason, did you hear that door at all at any point of the event that I was describing?
No, Dave, actually, I don't remember hearing any of those noises from that particular time around the closet.
Okay. That, to me, makes it even more weird, because I guess when it comes down to it, you're actually closer to that door than I am up in my bedroom. But, so yeah, after that door happened, the thing with the door happened, what did we end up having happen after that, Jason?
Well, I remember later that same night, I was coming out of the bathroom. I turned the lights off. You were in the kitchen. And as soon as I turned the lights off in the bathroom, you had actually made a comment as to how dark the kitchen seemed to get. It seemed to get extra dark, or darker than it would typically be after just turning that light off in the next room over.
Yeah, I think it was one of those weird scenarios where we both turned the lights that we had on off at the same time. And I remember when the lights went off, like you said, the darkness seemed even darker than what it normally does in the house. And I believe it was actually a full moon that night, I think, or very close to it. So there was some pretty bright white light outside from the moon. And inside it was just very dark, and there was a very, I don't want to say a threatening feeling, but a very a feeling that somebody was nearby. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely felt as if someone was, we were not alone.
Yeah, it was definitely weird. And then later on that night, I had gone to bed. You were outside on the back porch, and you heard like a tapping sound on one of the windows that is alongside the deck. And I think from the way you said it, you came inside because you thought that Ryan or I were pranking you, trying to make you just turn around and see what was happening. But actually, I was asleep. I was fast asleep. And I know the next day, well, before that, I guess really we never really figured out what that was. So I don't know if that adds to the theory that maybe the doll happened, because all of this stuff happened the day of and the day after we had the interaction with the doll.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when you think about it, that transfer of energy that I felt, there's no way to know 100%, but it could very well be possible that maybe that event, standing there in the hallway holding the doll, that maybe that was the point that it actually did attached to me to come home with us to this house and to start producing activity. And it just seems like it's continued ever since.
And there's more stories that I don't even think we've gotten to tell you guys yet.
No, you have not. I've heard the tapping stories on the door under the stairs story, but I don't think I've heard any others. So this will be news to me.
Jason, do you want to cover the next couple that happened?
Well, the next day, after we were both up, I mentioned to you, Dave, about the knock that I heard that earlier that morning, and not knowing exactly what time of night that this did happen and whether or not Dave had been asleep at this point or not, he went upstairs to attempt to recreate this sound with moving the fan along his window. Sometimes he'll move his fan at night before he goes to bed or whatever, make an adjustment to it or the window. So he goes up to try and see if we can recreate this same knocking noise I heard. I stay out on the patio. I never ended up hearing anything that he was up there doing. So he comes back down from recreating the noise, or attempting to, and he heard what sounded like one of the doors downstairs here opening as if I came in off of the porch. He came out and asked me if I had stepped inside the house. And I said, no, I've been out here the whole time waiting on you. And you had said that you had very clearly heard what sounded like a door opening and then actually closing, I believe.
Yeah, because I was coming down the stairs, and like you said, I thought I had heard you coming in off the patio and closing the door, but evidently it ended up not being you, because when I actually got down here, you were still outside.
That's right. And then, wasn't long after that, you and I would go back into the kitchen. Nova, Ryan's cat, was actually in the back near his room, and I can't remember, Dave, if you had heard it, but I heard what sounded like almost the sound of a metal pan when you set it down on a counter. It kind of has that couple moments of a little bit of a reverb, like a little ringing noise. And I could have swore I heard that coming from the back near Ryan's room. And then it wasn't even a minute later that Nova came running out from the back. And I mean, she actually startled Dave and I. She was running so quickly. She looked like she had just literally, for no pun intended, seen a ghost. And that also was very peculiar. So not long after that, we decided to set up some recorders. We were getting ready to go to the store or something. And you set the camera up, and I started on a digital audio, and it wasn't even 15 seconds in that we both heard what sounded like almost a teapot when it's blowing steam. And remarkably, we captured it on audio on the recorder.
And we're going to let you guys take a listen to that right now. So go ahead and take a listen to this clip and see if you can hear what sounds to be that strange teapot sound that Jason and Dave captured.
Did you just whistle? Did you just whistle? So yeah, that was a very, very weird sound. I don't think I had ever heard anything like that in the house here before. And I don't know, it was just weird that we both happened to hear it and that we caught it on the recording at the same time. So that's just some of the weird things that have been happening around here. What about
But yeah, I think we should go into some stories now from our earlier years of investigating, because we all have stories about spiritual attachments and strange stories of entities following us home and things of that nature. Now, Steve, you have had quite a few of those, or multiple ones, to say the least. Which one in your memory stands out as the most memorable?
I would say the one that really kind of, as you said, stands out the most. And it involves the same entity that uses a certain portrait in my museum as a conduit. Her name is Annie. And there's been at least two occasions where I can wholeheartedly say that I believe that she followed me home. And the only way I can describe both experiences as basically me having an out-of-body experience. We'll start off. Both times I was asleep. This happened sometime during the middle of the night. And both times I'm standing in the same place in my bedroom. At a location, I may not even be standing. All I know is it's like a first person point of view. Because where my point of view is, I would be standing in the middle of my bed. And I'm looking over top of myself as I'm sleeping on my bed, towards the door to my bedroom, which I always close. And I always keep my room pretty much pitch black. Who I saw walk through my door, which during these experiences, my door opened. This lady in a period Victorian looking dress, not real ritzy per se, but she walks through the open door and sits on the ledge of my bed. The second time this happens, the same thing happens. Same thing happens with the door opening. She walks through the door. She sits down on the ledge of my bed, and then she proceeds to lay down beside me. But as she lays down, I wake up. And
that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My door was closed, nothing out of the norm. And the reason I could see her during these two experiences, if you will, the moonlight was very bright, and in reality, the moonlight was the same, had the same amount of light coming through my windows. So it was a very almost emotional experience, because it took almost 2 years to find out who the lady in the picture was. So during that time frame of roughly 2 years, there's no doubt in my mind that a bond was created. And with any of my relics I have in my museum, I don't go with the whole "you have to stay here, you have to stay here." I let them come and go wherever they want. I don't believe in restricting them unless the entity is indeed malevolent and needs to be dealt with accordingly. But Annie, I feel, even with you guys, has nothing but the best intentions, the best thoughts to even you guys, which is, I think, in one way, form, or the other, she's in some way touched your guys' lives, and with the experiences that you've had, investigating her portrait. So I would say that experience for me tops all of my other ones. I did have another experience happen during the time frame when I was married, but I wasn't present for that. But it only happened when I left to go to work on a night tour at the penitentiary, where I'm a nighttime tour guide. And again, this was two experiences, and my ex-wife told me what had happened. She heard me drive off, and as you guys know, I used to have a Dodge Durango that was very, very loud. So it was pretty obvious whenever I would turn it on and drive off.
That thing was extremely loud. That could wake the dead, no pun intended.
And she would say she would hear me turn on my vehicle and drive away. Now, she said the first experience for her happened, and this is, again, kind of tying in something that I believe followed me home and was visiting my home and in this case, terrorizing my now ex-wife. That she would hear, after I'd already driven off, about 5 or 10 minutes later, she would hear what sounded like someone, or me, my body weight, walk up the steps to the kitchen, walk through the kitchen into the living room, and just stand in the middle of the living room floor plan. So the first time, she got up and she thought it was me. and walked down a little bit. We had a little bit of a hallway, and she would look into the living room, and of course no one's there. She looked up and saw that the ceiling fan was barely spinning. It was barely moving. It was not even on. So that freaked her out. The second time it happened, the same situation, the same scenario happened where she heard what sounded like me or someone my weight walk up the steps, because you can hear the floorboards creaking and whatnot. Walk through the living room, walk into the kitchen, walk into the living room, but this time it didn't stop. It walked into the hallway, down the little hallway, into the bedroom, and stood beside her bed. And she said she was terrified. She could hear the weight distributing on the floorboards beside the bed. She said she felt so terrified and what we would call oppressed, spiritually oppressed, that she could barely muster the ability to say a prayer for protection. And I think, honestly, that's when the whole fiasco happened, where she was calling and contacting every friend I have that does paranormal research, or in one way, form, or the other was linked to the prison, and asking them not to be a part of my life. You know, I was upset about that, her going behind my back about that, but I can at least understand why after she told me what had happened to her. So I would say those two events would be tops for me.
Adios mios. Just cut that out. Yeah, I mean, I could see where that would definitely have a lasting impression on somebody. That would be terrifying.
It wasn't too much long after that the we went through the divorce. So,
what about you, Ryan? Have you, what's something that's stands out in your mind about this?
I would say there was an experience that really stands out in my mind on the terms of having a spiritual attachment or have something follow me home. I think that I really did have an experience a few years back. Well, I should say 5 or 6 years back that really stands out in my mind. It really shocked me. It startled me, and I think I'll always remember it. At least I'll remember it for the majority of my life. It was shortly after we had finished investigating a house in Junior, West Virginia for the first time, which was turned into an episode of Paranormal Quest early on in our project of making these documentaries. So we filmed for the evening and the night in this house in Junior, West Virginia, and I remember the resident in this house. Her name is Angie. Angie had told the story of a dream that she had in which she went down the steps into a stone crypt, and that she walked this dark hallway that opened up into this chamber, and that a voice came out of the darkness and told her to kill her children. And it was a really scary thing, and at the end of the dream, she said she looked down and saw her daughter's body laying beside her, which she thought was the spirit trying to intimidate her or scare her or trying to influence her to cause harm to her family. But we investigated that house. After we conducted this investigation, in which we really didn't capture much, even though the claims of activity in the house were very oppressive towards the family, towards the children, and it was causing a lot of havoc in that home. And I think Angie was really reaching out to us in hopes that we could help her at least understand the activity better, if not rid the house of the activity. But long story short, when the investigation was done, I went back to Pittsburgh because I was in film school at the time, and I was living in a residence hall in downtown Pittsburgh. I had a roommate who was not actually home that night. So I was in this room, in this dorm room, by myself, and I fell asleep. This was 2 nights after we had conducted that investigation. Well, I fall asleep, and sure enough, as I fall asleep, I start to dream. And my dream that I'm having, I didn't realize it in that moment, but it was the exact same dream that Angie had had. I walked down these stairs into this long, dark hallway, stone walls, and walk all the way down, and as I realize that I'm stepping into this open chamber, this crypt-like room, that I had better get out of there. So in the dream, I turned around and I ran back the hallway, up the stairs, and out into what looked like a starry night. As I'm exiting the stairwell, all of a sudden I wake up, and as soon as I wake up, I look across the room, and there is a dark figure, a silhouette of a man standing across the room in front of the window staring at me. I'll never forget, because it startled me more than I think I've ever been startled in my life. I jumped up out of the bed, I pressed my back against the wall, and I let out an audible yelp, a scream, because I was not expecting to see that figure standing there staring at me. And I blinked a few times, I shut my eyes, opened my eyes back up, and that figure was gone. But what about you, Dave? Have you ever had anything follow you home? Any attachments, experiences, anything you can't explain?
Actually, I have, but not to be dramatic. It's not something that I speak of publicly, so I will pass this on to Jason. What about you, Jason? Anything you'd like to speak of?
Well, people, if you're looking for a attachment story from someplace that is mostly from any other place for that matter, other than the former West Virginia State Penitentiary, like what you've already heard some stories from this evening, then you're out of luck, because that is where my story would actually come from. But it was around a trip to the prison I made down, or up here rather, with the guys. Invited me up to the prison with them one night. And this was, I believe, about 6 years ago. Anyway, after I'd got back home, because at the time I was living down in southern West Virginia with my family, my parents. And for the week following the time after I got back home, I returned. Only when I was gone, it seemed like, out of the house, my parents was describing a lot of unusual activity in the home, which typically, over the years, we've always had strange happenings in the house there. But my dad, if he was in the kitchen, he would hear, there was a couple times he heard a male voice whisper his name right in his ear, very close. There was one instance, actually, during this same week, where my mother was, she was actually in the kitchen as well, and we have some chimes, or my parents have some chimes, rather, over the sink, or at least, well, we did. And all of a sudden, they just start to move and chime. And, of course, obviously, in the house, we didn't have any windows open, no fans on, so there's no moving airflow that would make these wind chimes sound off. And my parents could tell that something was strange, there was something more going on, just as how it's been here at the house here recently after the doll incident. But they could tell something was extra not right, so to speak. So it wasn't long after that they eventually burned some sage and performed a blessing throughout the home. And then for at least the next 3 to 4 visits that I made back to the prison with you guys over the next several years, and it was so strange because almost to a 24-hour T before I would actually leave Fayette County to come up north to Moundsville, almost 24 hours to the dot, something strange things would start happening inside the house. Usually knocks in my room, or actually a couple times footsteps in my room, or just noises outside my door after I lay down. And it was always 24 hours to a dot before I would leave the house to head to the prison. That whole final 24 hours before I left, things were getting a little freaky.
It knew that you were coming home.
You could certainly say that. And ever since, of course, that they had performed the blessing, things had reduced drastically. But again, things for a little while had been kind of strange in my room too, and that went on for years. Not anymore so much when I am back at the house, but that was real weird.
So after they did their blessing, did things stop happening to them and only to you?
Yes, I would say. Of course, we've always had strange things going on in the house, but as to those exact types of events taking place, the whispering in the ears, the strange movement of the wind chimes, that never did happen again. I guess I should have made that more clear. For the week after I got back from this particular visit to the prison with you guys in 2012, my parents, and only my parents, would experience these things. Then they performed the blessing. And then the only things that would happen to me that felt I had some kind of attachment from the prison was just those strange activity before I would return to Moundsville. But again, my parents, they believe very, very firmly that, because all this strange things started to happen after my return from visit in 2012. So
we do have, in fact, some Facebook questions that we would like to have answered, or that we would like to answer ourselves. So, of course, we had the question from when we had wanted to do this topic as psychics, mediums.
So what have you got there for us, Ryan? What are these questions that are coming in?
As I said, this was when we were actually going to do this as the psychic topic, but I think since they took the time to ask this question and were nice enough to put it in our comment section, that we should give them a shout out and answer their question for them. This question is from Mr. Hunter Bocook. He wanted to know, have you ever brought a psychic to an investigation, and if so, did they pick up on anything sinister or creepy? Dave, have we ever brought a psychic on an investigation, and have they ever picked up anything sinister or creepy?
You know, Ryan, not really that I can think of, other than I would step out to say my mom, but she doesn't go through the world claiming to be a psychic, although that woman has done things that creep me out still to this day. And she'll know what I mean by her her sixth sense growing up.
Yeah, and so as far as investigating goes, your mom definitely, I feel like, has that sixth sense, but I think we did have our good friend Sharon that walked around the prison with us a few times and picked up on some things. Now, I had the pleasure of actually getting to do an investigation with Sharon at a small bar in McMecken, West Virginia, with a good friend of ours, Lori O'Neill, and it was pretty fascinating as to what Sharon can actually pick up on. Sharon does readings of people as well, and I think that's probably what I think is most impressive. My standpoint of looking at her abilities is her ability not only to judge people's character, but her ability to actually predict things that happen to people in the future, which she has actually said before.
Go Sharon. Go Sharon.
Yeah, so that was a really good question there, Hunter, and I think we will at one time, when we are prepared to do it, we will do a full podcast on psychics and mediums and our thoughts on it. So
just really, it's going to take a lot of pulling it up from the ground, getting the questions that we need to base the whole episode on, you know what I mean?
We also wanted to give a big shout out to Mr. Stephen Young. He is a good friend and an avid listener to this podcast and an avid supporter of Paranormal Quest. Thank you to Stephen Young for putting the comment in the comment section of a post that actually inspired us to choose the topic for today's podcast.
Absolutely.
Also, I wanted to mention I have been actively working and editing on the St. Joseph's Hospital episode. And as we have said in past podcasts, it is on the way. Well, guess what? It is still on the way, and we are working through it. A release date will be announced very shortly. But a release date is imminent, and it is coming to you very soon, so be ready for that. And just so you know, this is going to be one of the best episodes of Paranormal Quest yet. So if you've seen our other episodes and you like them, you'll love this episode from the St. Joseph's Hospital. And if you haven't seen our other episodes, what are you doing?
What's your problem, man?
Get on there and watch them. I think it's about that time that we choose our the topic options for next week. We normally have you go to our Facebook page and decide what topics you want us to talk about. We didn't do it this week. because we're awful. But next week we will do it. I think an interesting topic of discussion would be the influence of paranormal television on the paranormal field.
That's a very good one.
Is it good? Is it bad? How does it help or hurt the paranormal?
I think maybe a second one that we could potentially use is how does the amount of traffic from tourism affect a haunted historical location?
So in other words, Steve, the ever-continuing layering of residual energy upon a location that is already haunted.
Exactly.
I think that is a wonderful idea. So, go to facebook.com/paranormal quest and be looking for the post, be looking for the poll for you to decide between those two. And by next week, the winner of that poll will be the topic of discussion for next week's podcast.
No way.
So
they get to choose?
yeah, they get to choose.
That's nuts.
I know. What other podcast lets the listeners decide what they talk about?
Absolutely none that I can think of. What about you, Steve?
It's almost like there's freedom.
And we would absolutely love those of you who are listening to this right now. If you made it this far, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, go watch our other episodes, because we love to do this for you, and the only way for us to continue to do this is to get as many views on this stuff as possible. So share this podcast, find your favorite episode of Paranormal Quest, and share it to social media. I think it's about that time that we should start promoting our Patreon.
Absolutely. It is just as simple as going to patreon.com/paranormal quest and becoming a patron.
Yeah, if you like what we do and you like the content we provide, we would very much appreciate a contribution, anything that you are willing to give to help us with our endeavors with Paranormal Quest and with our documentary projects.
I was going to say, and if people really would, take reasoning and logic into the situation, and of all 2,000 plus of the people that liked our Facebook page would go to Patreon and just pledge $1 or $2 each.
So I think it's a very good point, and we've talked about it before. Steve has brought this up multiple times, that if everybody that subscribes to our YouTube channel, or even just everybody that follows us on Facebook, would go to our Patreon page and pledge $1 a month in support of what we do, it would help us, immensely with our production costs to bring you the content that we bring you, because we love what we do, but it becomes very difficult to do it with absolutely no money, because every bit of production costs money, and that's something that not a lot of people realize, even when it comes to YouTube videos, the style of YouTube videos that we do. But we hope you enjoyed this podcast. We hope you enjoyed hearing our stories about the spiritual attachments, the strange stories of spirits following us home from investigations. And we want to thank you for joining us tonight to feed your addiction. Thank you for listening to the Ghost-Addicts Podcast.
And if we don't hear from you, good evening, good afternoon, and good night. I said that in the wrong order.